Today I'm going to be responding to public demand with my most requested video. Okay, so that's not a lot of public demand, but 2015's A Court of Thorns and Roses was Throne of Glass author Sarah J Maas's opening salvo in her newest assault on quality literature. The ACOTAR series, as it's sometimes called, was aimed at a more mature audience. It even says so on the back cover. And if you're a parent who's seen that and is wondering what your child is reading, what it basically means is the lead character uses shit as an exclamation and bastard as an insult rather too much. There is also a sex scene which, while not 50 Shades of Grey explicit, is wildly inappropriate for younger readers who, not having noticed the warning on the back and having only previously read The Juvenile Throne of Glass by this author, I did assume were the target audience for the novel. For your own peace of mind, you can find that in chapter 27. Swearing and sex aside, far greater damage would be done to a young person's well-being, future prospects and personality growth by simply associating the lead character as any kind of aspirational ideal. Fans of the book and those hoping to keep their bestial fetishes from their parents are no doubt already steaming angry with me, and we will establish shortly where they get their short tempers from. But if you are a fan, perhaps this is the point at which you just click off the video and spend your time more enjoyably somewhere else. The story starts off as a Cinderella copy, with our heroine Feyre showing off her hunting skills in the wild and then returning to a lifestyle of domestic drudgery with her lame father and vile or stupid sisters. Feyre is then whisked away to the lap of luxury, and the book retreads the footsteps of Beauty and the Beast. After 100 pages of the novel, I desperately wanted to give up, but I had a flash of enlightenment. This is not a fantasy novel. This is a romance novel that has a fantasy dressing. That means that the laborious middle section, where Feyre is held in the land of masked fairies and banters with the permanently masked lord of the manor and his sidekick, it should not be judged against the work of Le Guin, Anne McCaffrey and Janie Wertz, but against its true peers, which are E.L. James and Sandra Hill. Towards the end, however, Maas shucks off the Disney cloak and turns the story into a slight retelling of her own Throne of Glass, with the heroine locked away, bantering with an inevitable new love interest, the lady doth protest too much, and participating in a number of challenges that are unnecessarily dragged out over many months. In my previous look at Maas's writing, I judged her book Throne of Glass on three core things. They are a convincing protagonist, some kind of emotional impact, and an interesting story. A book needs at least one of the three to be worth investing the time it takes to read it. So having failed Throne of Glass on all three counts, does A Court of Thorns and Roses do any better and prove, as one commenter suggested, that Maas's first novel is an anomaly of youth and inexperience, and that she's now a more capable author? The opening of this book isn't awful. Our heroine Feyre is hunting game in the woods, and the scene setting does a reasonable job of establishing the world as a place of need and desperate hunger. Feyre too seems to be suffering and to have learned or developed her skills as a huntress. It's a far more sympathetic and well-developed introduction to a character than Selena got in Throne of Glass. It doesn't last very long. Initially, we are exposed to the fact that Feyre, the youngest of three sisters, is working hard for the good of her family. However, it's soon clear how incredibly resentful of this burden she is. One is forced to ask, is a good deed even a good deed if you resent doing it that much? If you do it purely because you were guilted into it by a deathbed promise? If you silently wish for your sisters to leave so that your burden would be a touch easier? This ambiguity, this immaturity, it creates a question mark around this character that could make for a very interesting exploration, but it won't be written by this author. A Court of Thorns and Roses instead has a character who thinks and behaves like this, from the scene where an enormous monster is smashed into her home, presumably seeking revenge for the loss of his friend. "Silence," the creature snapped, and rage boiled up in me so blistering it was an effort to keep from lunging to stab my dagger in his eye. Well, in a life or death situation, if you can lunge and stab your foe in the eye, just do it. Instead, faced with the opportunity to solve the problem, she has to make an effort to stop herself from solving it. Please tell me how this makes sense to anybody. Of course, it's then explained why she cannot do it, so why write this at all? And it's not the only time she does it. Had there not been an insurmountable trench between us, I would have ripped her throat out. If I'd had the strength, I would have leaped on him and ripped him apart. 2 more examples of the same character doing the exact same thing. It's simply nonsense. All 3 potential foes are powerful magic users, which Feyre is not. All are established as having the ability to kill her instantly, so these comments are merely moronic drivel. Your character cannot do these things, not for the reasons she gives, but because the attempt would lead to her immediate demise by your own rules, so stop writing them. They don't make your character seem tough, they make her and the author look like half-wits. But if we return to the opening scene, this scene can be done well, when it's the character's very impotence, the futility of their efforts to save their family that explain their rage. Instead, Feyre is just really angry because the monster told her father to be quiet. It's all kind of pathetic, and that it doesn't seem like she's reacting in a natural way any more than the monster is, because he himself switches back and forth from furious outbursts to lengthy waffling. Now, I know that if you're a fan of the book, you'll be butting at this point, and I will get to the twist. But the beast isn't the only creature prone to inexplicable, if fleeting, bouts of anger. All of these passages on screen are from our heroine and narrator, Feyre. They are, of course, the results of a simple word search for anger and rage. There are other examples like this one. Lucy and I both told you to stay in your room, Tamlin said, so calmly that I wanted to rip out my hair. And no doubt some of these reactions are justified, but if your first emotional reaction to any situation is anger or rage, then please seek help, because it's neither normal or healthy. In a literary sense, though, you can do something with this very easily. Create a character with such an obvious flaw, then have them overcome it to triumph. It's as old as the hills. Of course, Selena and Feyre, they both behave in this way and don't consider it a flaw, let alone an issue to overcome. The question that arises then is, how autobiographical are these characters? Is Sarah J Maas like Selena and Selena Mark II an angry, vile and entitled bitch? Because Maas tells us that Feyre is too good for us, too good for everyone, which contradicts all evidence provided, and Maas is writing these entitled, petulant, constantly angry half-wits as exemplary figures for young women. God help us all. In the scene where Feyre first meets the enraged beast like Tamlin, she channels her inner Selena a touch more, and in an equally pointless way. When spring comes, hunt in the grove just south of the Big Bend and Silver Spring Creek. The rabbits make their warrens there. Ask Isaac Hale to show you how to make snares. I taught him last year. It's awfully kind of her to teach Isaac Hale how to catch rabbits, as catching rabbits would probably be useful to him, as he is the eldest son of the only well-off farmer in the village. It almost seems like something his father or another farmhand would have taught him long beforehand. I just want to dwell on this line a touch more, so for context, this is part of the information that Feyre is trying to give her sisters, as the apparently angry and impatient Tamlin is trying to shepherd her into a speedier departure. As such, in a book about real seeming human characters, each word would be precious. These words are irrelevant to the point that Isaac Hale would teach her sister how to hunt. We would assume without them that Isaac knows how to hunt because he works a farm, and he knows how to hunt rabbits because if they're not food, they're vermin. Farmers kill rabbits because they do very real damage to crops. But not this farmer. He needs Feyre to show him how. This line goes against the established positioning of her as someone who learned how to do something through hardship and effort. Now she's simply the recipient of knowledge beamed to her for being awesome that she imparts to those around who should know it but somehow don't. It's 100% more likely that it would have been him that showed her how to make the snares. But as it simply won't do to make our heroine seem less perfect, and it's completely irrelevant who taught who anyway, just cut the damn line out already. The only reason to include this line is to make your character look good, but it doesn't do that. It makes her look snotty and everyone else look strange and unnatural. You do not need to explain things that have an obvious and clear explanation, though if she didn't, Maas's book would probably be half as long, though likely twice as good. We get the same thing here. Who taught you to swim? When I was 12, I watched the village children swimming at a pond and figured it out myself. As does this later interaction with Tamlin. You went to catch the cereal? I caught the cereal, I corrected. Feyre decides to trap a cereal because Lucian rather awkwardly and unnaturally lets slip that if she traps one, it has to answer her questions. He tells her exactly where they are, he tells her exactly how to snare one, he also tells her it would be insane or stupid to try, he tells her how to escape across water if it goes wrong, and he gives her a bow and arrow and a knife to help her. Alice, the household servant, later tells Feyre of a much easier way to deal with the serial, though it's unclear if she's being completely serious, as what she says is kind of facetious. And of course there's a touch of greyness around Lucien's behaviour, which in the post-twist world makes zero sense. But Feyre is furious with him later for not warning her. He deserved to be walloped for sending me so unprepared to the serial. Now, if Lucien didn't know about Alice's method of hunting the serial, then this is a ridiculous overreaction, one that's repeated later on as well, because it's really quite hard to see what more he could have done to prepare her. But then that rage has got to be raged, right? On the night of one of the fairy rites, Feyre is told 4 times to stay at home. Of course she disobeys the request. I'll give Maas her due. This passage on screen does suggest that there's some magic involved, particularly this go see, which has echoes of Rossetti's Goblin Market, but this wild, wicked voice may simply be Feyre's own urges, as this isn't the first time that she's done the exact opposite of what was asked of her. At the fairy rite, she's saved from a gang rape by the first appearance of Rhysand, the despotic queen's right-hand man. Feyre is, of course, more borrowed by his arrogance at suggesting she should be grateful for his intervention than she is traumatised by the attack on her. After Lucien takes her back to the manor, he points out that he did tell her to stay home, and she responds, "So what?" I said, shouting as well. "I hated feeling like a disobedient child." Well, dumbass, if you don't like feeling like a disobedient child, don't behave like a disobedient child. 2 pages later, Lucien again tells her to stay home, and smarting from the near miss with a gang rape, and still feeling like a disobedient child, she disobeys him almost immediately because she wants a midnight snack. Tamlin fights a monster called a bogey, which is really funny if you're from England, and Selena is, so she only lives just down the road from me according to the map. But back to the mortal combat. His clothes were in shreds, long vicious slashes that made me wonder how he wasn't gutted and dead, but the muscled skin peering out beneath his shirt was smooth, unharmed. "Did you kill the bogey?" My voice was hardly more than a whisper. Yes, a dull, empty answer, as if he couldn't be bothered to remember to be pleasant, as if I were the very, very bottom of a long list of priorities. Now, Feyre is literally so vile and so emotionally stunted that she can take offence that he is distracted by having just survived a life or death battle. Now, I don't say this very often, but if your partner drags himself home covered in blood and rags, they might appreciate it more if you made a sandwich or a hot beverage than if you made it all about your entitled me. By all means, pause this one because I won't read it, but what hideous crime do you think that Tamlin performed to make her feel this level of whiny, entitled, emotional incontinence? Well, he offered to help her read some books. What a bastard. Equally unlikable and just barely more convincing, Feyre is different from Selena only in that she likes to paint, which we will look at later in this review. Now, fans of the book may find this somewhat disagreeable, but Maas can't write, not even slightly. In fact, it's a touch embarrassing that this book, in this state, found its way into print. The narrator of the novel is Feyre herself, and all the proceedings are related in the first person. This style of writing is probably easier than a heterodiegetic model, as it allows you to focus on an individual and present like a true depiction of their character. As such, their individual mannerisms may lead to a degree of repetition, but let's be honest, do we really think that's what's happening here? Or is it simply that Maas isn't a good enough writer to do better than repeat this horrible cliche over and over? Additionally, all but one of the capitalised examples here is the opening line of a paragraph. So, while it's not fair to say that Maas has no idea what she's doing, it's fairly reasonable, I think, to say that when she gets an idea, she can only constantly repeat it and repeat it. Perhaps if you're sitting on the fence on that one, this one may sway your mind. Or perhaps this one. Or this one. In fact, in the light of such extreme repetition, Feyre's painting seems to be introduced not so much as a character trait, but as a way of actually getting out of writing. It's as if, as an author, writing has become a homework-like chore to Maas. Otherwise, how do you explain the sheer volume of times she says, "It was amazing, I couldn't try to paint it"? And the trouble is, when you get so much of that, it's that when you get something like this, a reader's inevitable reaction is to suggest maybe you can't, but a decent writer might at least try. But then Maas will take the time to write this, but seemingly won't devote 30 seconds to a Google search and learn that the outside of the ear is made up of the pinna and the earlobe. You can, if you prefer, just use ear. She will tell us that Isaac Hale is the son of the only well-off farmer in the village, 8 pages after relating that 2 plump and pretty farmers' wives strolled their way past on their way to market. Now this is a world of desperate deprivation, so how do these wives get to be so plump if they aren't rich? And there's 2 of them. But if Isaac's father is the only well-off farmer, is he a polygamist? The only emotional impact this novel imparts is it's annoying how badly it's written. But borrowing from such esteemed literary sources as the Disney back catalogue, the story at least has to be better, right? Well, on page 33, a beast later revealed as Tamlin, the love interest, smashes the door to Feyre's home down. He's angry because his minimal dialogue is presented in capitals with one-word exclamations. But the scene soon descends into exchanges of long-winded waffle, as Maas struggles to explain the finer points of politics that mean Feyre can choose to live her days among the fairies or be gutted like swine. Pretty sure that's not a tough choice for most people to make. Yet the sudden and repeated switches in Tamlin's behaviour and demeanour make little sense, and a scene like so many others is left feeling contrived and unnatural. Yes, book fans, I'm getting to the twist. After taking stock and settling into her new circumstances, Feyre's life takes on a certain amount of routine. Usually that's doing nothing, followed by lunch with the Lord Tamlin and his one retainer Lucien. Eventually she asks what the purpose of her being there is, and she's told, nothing, do what you want. Now a degree of alarm is caused by this. If she's simply to waste her time in opulence, what is she to do about her family, who are still starving in poverty in the human realm? Tamlin tells her he's magicked them up some money and food, they're doing fine. So where's the story? Where's the drama, the threat? This is why I say this is not a fantasy book, but a romance book with a veneer of fantasy draped over it. Simply the only thing happening in this stage of the novel is the awkward romance between Feyre and Tamlin. Maas has, in 2 lines of dialogue, successfully removed all the peril and danger from the novel and left herself with a trio of protagonists whose existence can be boiled down to having dinner together and banter that's cheesy enough for 1,000 king-sized pizzas. These lethal, immortal beings really had nothing better to do than this. Gradually, a little bit of story starts to seep into the drivel, but it's a laborious process, and it was here that I most desperately wanted to DNF this book and eternally curse the kind commenters that made me read it. Trapped in the opulent manner of the Fey High Lord Tamlin, Feyre decides that diplomacy is the most likely way of her being able to leave and return to her family. By now the book is in full Beauty and the Beast mode, so you know exactly where it's going. Of course it requires an awful amount of dreadful exposition and worse dialogue contrivances to actually get there. But here in the civilised Fey court and channeling her inner diplomat, perhaps you'll get to see another side of Feyre. This is how she apologises to someone she's trying to win favour with. We apologised at dinner. He even bought me a bouquet of white roses from his parents' garden. I dismissed them as nothing. My slight edit here makes this seem marginally worse than the novel does, but I have to ask, is the reason Maas writes away the apology as something that's so trivial that 4 words will cover it, and then erases even them with this hideous, entitled and calculated insult, because she just doesn't know how to apologise? How autobiographical are her hideous characters? It is clear from the very outset that Tamlin has a genuine interest in her, while Lucien seems largely bitter about the death of Andras. Yet in chapter 8, when Lucien is mocking her and Tamlin asking with compassion about her life, Feyre deduces, I tried to keep from grimacing as I turned on my heel and left. Let Tamlin dismiss me as a rude, uncouth human not worth his careful watch. I'd be better off persuading Lucien to speak to Tamlin on my behalf. Okay, so she repeatedly rejects Tamlin's overtures of friendship, offering him insults in return. Instead, she attempts to crack Lucien's far colder demeanour in order to persuade him to persuade the far more amenable Tamlin to listen to her pleas. But in the very unlikely event that Lucien responds favourably to her attempts to ingratiate herself with him, he'd still have to persuade Tamlin, which she just made harder by insulting him. Who behaves like this? It's mind-blowing how awful this section of the book is, but what's even worse is that the bonding with Lucien amounts to little more than him being spiteful and her, in her own words, giving bland replies to Lucien's remarks about the weather. This is why her magical know-it-all skills are a problem, because setting herself the minor task of making friends with Lucien, she still can't be bothered to even try and be nice. The romance section weighs in at more than 200 pages, with her arriving at Tamlin's court on page 47. And just as their romance is blossoming into something, Tamlin sends her back home and she leaves on page 251. There's very little in this section that I can recommend. Yes, I am getting to the twist, but this section ends with Tamlin announcing that he is sending Feyre back home even though the treaty forbids it. Tamlin asserts his power though with the following: if they have a problem with it, they can tell me, with Feyre musing and wind up as ribbons. Except 2 pages earlier, Tamlin and Lucien were begging and grovelling, utterly humiliated by Rhysand. So what if it's him that has a problem? What if it's the Queen Amarantha, who apparently is even more powerful than him, and let's be honest, is going to be one of those two because they are the authority in this realm? Feyre returns home to find her family transplanted into wealth by Tamlin's magic and generosity. She begins to realise that Tamlin was in danger and that the creature she trapped, the Suriel, had told her she must remain with him for everything to be okay. So after a few days she returns to his court to find it in ruins. Alice, the fairy who served as a handmaiden, has remained behind and begins a colossal plot dump that lasts about 10 pages. But here comes the twist. The treaty that said that Feyre had to go and live with the fairies to make up for the fact that she killed one of them was a lie. There is no treaty. We learn that Tamlin was cursed, though the curse is not very specific about what it does or how it does it, but in a nutshell, he's cursed to have 49 years to dispel the curse, otherwise he will have to go to Queen Amarantha's home under the mountain, where she intends to break him in front of the assembled lords. She said he had 7 times 7 years before she claimed him, before he had to join her under the mountain. That's it? Couldn't she just break him with a spell if that was the plan? If she can curse him to do this, then why not? What's weird is that what follows throughout this point is that Tamlin seems to have free will, yet he does literally nothing to help. Tamlin is a masked and brooding figure. I'm sure some girls will enjoy the portrayal, but while we are told he's incredibly strong, we're shown that he's also at his worst completely passive, and at his best utterly reactive to danger even before this. His compassion for Feyre is generally thrown back in his face with spite, and only post-prophecy does it become clear why he ignored Lucien's advice when he said, maybe we should just take a stand, maybe it's time to say enough. Dump the girl somewhere, kill her, I don't care, she's nothing but a burden here, she'd sooner put a knife in your back than talk to you, or any of us. And remember that this is Lucien, this is the guy that Feyre thinks will be a softer touch than Tamlin. But the twist also makes a liar of the Suriel, who tells her that she cannot go back home, even though the treaty that is keeping there is a fabrication of Tamlin's. While the curse itself is somewhat ambiguous, the prophecy on how to break it is incredibly specific. If he wanted to break her curse, he need only find a human girl willing to marry him, but not any girl, a human with ice in her heart, with hatred for our kind, a human girl willing to kill a fairy. Worse, the fairy she killed had to be one of his men, sent across the wall by him like lambs to slaughter. The girl could only be brought back here to be courted if she killed one of his men in an unprovoked attack, killed him for hatred alone, just as Durin had done to Slifia, so he could understand her sister's pain. Now there's a line here that's very important, killed him for hatred alone, because Feyre kills Andras because she thinks he's a wolf, and he's in the process of killing a deer, the only food that Feyre has found in her hunt, and she is starving. While it's fair to say she dislikes fairies, she kills out of hunger, and absolutely not for hatred alone. Feyre recalls the event like this. Andras had just stared at me before I killed him. Let me kill him so it could begin this chain of events, so that Tamlin might stand a chance of breaking the spell. But it's the ash arrow that killed him. It just took a few seconds to do it. And that was fired into him when he didn't know that she was there. So it simply isn't true to say that he let her kill him. The second arrow he made no attempt to dodge, that is fair. But that wasn't made of ash, and according to Feyre herself, it didn't matter, not with the ash arrow already in him. She's simply rewriting the past in the hope that you won't flip back to page 7 and see for yourself that what she's saying is wrong. Alice says again, you killed him with hate in your heart, which, given Feyre's animosity towards the Fae, is more accurate. But when she's explaining the prophecy, she is quite explicit, killed him for hatred alone, which is not true. There's a degree of fear in her when she kills Andras, and an element of trying to convince herself that he is just a wolf and not a fairy. But she kills for food, not hatred. Which is important, because otherwise our heroine is a hateful murderer and not heroically trying to feed her starving family. But in all honesty, I don't think that Maas would notice or care about that distinction. Maybe this is relevant to the sequels, but it's fairly clear, because the prophecy is so specific, that she's not the girl it refers to. But in this shocking post-twist world, we can look back on all sorts of things that now make no sense. Why is Lucien hesitant to save her from the Suriel, when she's the only one that can free all of their lands from the Blight, when the prophecy is so specific about that? Tamlin sends her away with just 2 days left to save the entire kingdom. He is, of course, protecting the one he loves from danger, temporarily, because he is damning both the Fey and human worlds to Amarantha's eternal tyranny. After her discussion with Alice, Feyre heads to the mountain court of Amarantha to free Tamlin and break the curse. Here the book most resembles Maas's own Throne of Glass, in that she again drags out what should be 3 days' worth of adventure over 3 months, and fills Feyre's days with lonesome locked-up angst in her cell and domestic drudgery out of it, as well as attending the court with Rhysand, with whom she has enough mutual animosity to make it abundantly clear where their relationship is going to end up. But Rhysand has a plan to free the entire kingdom, and it's a good one too. He's going to get Feyre drunk. He's going to feel her up in front of Tamlin so that he gets so angry he kills Amarantha. I think it'd be more likely in those circumstances that he'd kill Rhysand, or at least try to, given that Rhysand has already been portrayed as the more powerful of the two. Why does Rhysand not provoke Amarantha into killing Feyre? Surely that would make Tamlin even angrier, and with the right person. Given how easily he convinces her that the deserting associate of the Court of Summer was acting alone, it seems he could quite probably do it as well. With 70 pages of 400 remaining, the book suddenly becomes a fantasy book. The despot Amarantha agrees to a bargain with Feyre. If Feyre survives 3 challenges, she will lift Tamlin's curse. 3 different people call this a fool's bargain. Inexplicably, Amarantha even throws in a riddle that, if solved, will immediately fix everything. Amarantha agrees to this out of boredom. As an immortal, it would be interesting to explore the effects of that immortality, as Heinlein does in Time Enough for Love, for example. But this is definitely not that sort of book. It's just a stupid reason from a stupid antagonist. The trials themselves are also kind of odd. The first one, to kill a big monster, is handled well enough by Maas, and Feyre survives through using her brain, where Selena no doubt would have just punched the giant flesh-eating worm to death with her fists. Maybe we are making some progress here. The second challenge, though, is just really stupid, in that Feyre has a 33% chance of succeeding by pure chance. And given that Rhysand and Lucien are clearly helping her, Amarantha's failure to do something about Rhysand in particular is quite strange. But then this whole challenge thing is. The third challenge is to kill 3 people who are brought in with their faces hidden. Obviously, I expected this to be her family, but it's just 2 strangers and then a big reveal. But if she stabs 3 people in the heart, the entire kingdom will be free. She'll have survived the 3 challenges. There's actually no threat to her, but after she kills the first 2, the third person is revealed to be Tamlin herself. And I have to say that while the challenge is odd, Feyre's behaviour in that scene is quite well done. And the scene works, unless you start to think about it, because to deduce what she does requires recalling 2 fleeting mentions of Tamlin having a hard heart. Feyre realises he will not die if stabbed, so she stabs him as requested. This would be a lot more clever if those mentions weren't quite so fleeting. The first is deliberate. Lucien and Tamlin set her up to overhear a conversation, while the second mention comes from one of Amarantha's creatures, which they have very little control over. If the creature had said something else, anything slightly differently, would she have been able to work this out? This is their plan, and it requires an awful lot of things to go their way that are out of their control. So it's not really as good as it is extraordinarily dangerous. However, I will be fair, because in lots of media we've seen dangerous plans work plenty of times, so I'm not going to be too hard on this, especially when it is one of the more effective parts of the book. The problem is that the book is not very good, and that it's far longer than someone of such limited talent can write and keep interesting. That's why we get so much repetition. It's why the big twist requires the rewriting of earlier passages to fit it. It's why Amarantha bargains with Feyre without any real reason to do so. If you can force Tamlin under the mountain against his will, can you not force him to kill Feyre? Would that not break him more effectively than putting Feyre through 3 challenges, 2 of which are not great challenges at all, especially when one of Amarantha's most senior courtiers is so actively and obviously working against her? Very little of this actually makes any sense. Even the little things, such as when Tamlin asked Feyre if she's seen his gallery, the gallery he had closed, so it would be impossible for her to see it. "Have you seen the gallery?" I blurted. "There's a gallery in this house?" He grinned, actually grinned, the High Lord of the Spring Court. "I had it closed when I inherited this place." That's a big one of them, isn't it? Then we have Feyre buying seeds for her green-fingered sister. It still hadn't stopped me from buying her seeds for the flower garden she tended in the milder months whenever I could afford it. Wouldn't people who are starving most of the time buy seeds for green beans or carrots rather than flowers? Anything edible? It's also a book where Feyre rages at every perceived and many imaginary slights, yet lets this insult, which I think is the worst of them all, go without even blinking. "I can work, help around the kitchen or the gardens to pay for it. You'd be more of a hindrance." It's the sort of book where Lucian will sit silently through 2 pages of other people flirting and bantering before relaying the new and shocking information that the Blight has killed a bunch of children. It's a book where this counts as law. Her biggest weapon is that she keeps our powers contained, but she can't access them, not wholly, though she can control us through them. It's a book where this makes sense. I had never seen so many people in one place before, at least not without the glamour hiding them from me. So you didn't see them then? It's little wonder that in my second-hand copy of this book, only one word has been underlined by its previous owner, and it's this one. Tamlin insists, "I don't enforce rank in my court," and we are left to believe that his servants are servants for the fun of it, especially when we know that he can simply magic up dinner and the table it's served on, and that later magic users bathe Feyre with just a simple spell. But with all these servants and riches, isn't Tamlin contradicting the earlier assertion that rich people are bad? And too many families had already started begging for me to hope for handouts from the wealthier townsfolk. I'd witnessed firsthand exactly how far their charity went. I'd seen how pitiless the well-off were in our village. The monsters in our mortal realm were just as bad as those across the wall. Maas thinks that rich people are monsters. Perhaps she is onto something. This book is also scattered with anachronistic modern language, such as those on screen. This ugly one is particularly from the Twitter generation. Now, obviously, I'm not going to recommend this book, but at the same time, to be clear to the commenter on my review of Throne of Glass, nor do I want to take it away from people who do enjoy it. In truth, I hope that it gets you into more fantasy, and if you read Maas because you want to read female writers, I hope that you'll check out Janie Wirtz, Ursula Le Guin, Anne McCaffrey and Catherine Kerr, to name just a few. Ultimately, this book was recommended to me because the lovely commenter believes it is a better effort than Throne of Glass, and it shows Maas's progress as a writer. I don't think I will disagree with that. The revelation about Tamlin's hard heart is decently executed, as is the first of Feyre's trials. The way that Nestor's true character comes to light is also done well. However, Feyre is utterly unlikable and annoying, Maas can barely write, and her plot is drawn out far too long, and the big twist doesn't hold up to even the most cursory of investigation. I do like to say that I will read any book that is recommended to me, but I believe I've experienced enough now from Maas to know that I don't need to read any more. I'm happy for you, though, if you get some enjoyment out of this book. So you've stayed to the end, and I'm going to give you a little reward. Well, reward might be too generous a term. I'm going to show you a few frequency plots that demonstrate how Maas gets an idea in her head and then fixates on it, and how this makes her book feel extremely repetitive. You can see that she uses the word quirked twice in one scene, but only 3 times in the whole book. Now, I talked about this word in my Jim Butcher video about how you can use an unusual word like this to build up an individual's mannerisms and make a character unique. You can see that these two are from different characters, but in very close proximity in the text. Now, you do need to be a bit careful with the frequency graph. For example, in a fantasy book, you might search for the word sword, and you would see it clustered in one particular scene perhaps, but if that scene is a battle scene, then that of course would be what you would expect. It's perfectly reasonable. But with a word like ethereal, for example, it's clearly going to be describing people or phenomena. You'd expect it to be spread out. And as you can see here, it is slightly more spread out than some, but we still have nearly 50% of the uses in close proximity again. Here's prowl, again 50% of the uses in close proximity. Calluses, same thing. And even the much overused rolling. I could have sworn is one of the most overused phrases in the book, Yet again, we have two real clusters, especially towards the end here. What it means is we get the same phrases used over and over and over in the same scenes. It's striking and obvious, more so than if they're spread out more evenly. And it's in part why this novel feels so repetitive and so unimaginative. There is no real excuse for this because you can easily solve it. Just buy a damn thesaurus or use one of the online ones. Oh, and I really hate this map too.